everyone to another episode of Access. I am Javairyah, and today we will be discussing the Pakistani tech startup ecosystem. Our guest here today is Hamza Saeed Orakzai. He is a certified science and technology ecosystem professional and an experienced strategy planning, regulatory affairs, client management, and commercial diplomacy executive. That's a lot to add. And He's also well-known thought leader on the CPEC project and has worked on various aspects of projects related to power, infrastructure, and special economic zones under the CPEC. He is also currently serving at a leadership role in the apex federal government body to transform Pakistan's technology landscape through setting up world-class special technology zones for job creation, technology transfer, tech infrastructure development, and ease of doing business and knowledge creation. Now, thank you so much for giving us the time for this show. A lot of these things here in your bio are basically a lot of things that I will be questioning you upon is first of all understanding what exactly do we understand when we say the tech startup ecosystem. Is the startup system all about technology? It's just to understand for laypersons who are interested to know about this field, who may want to become part of this field but may not necessarily understand what it is. And secondly, what I would like to probe more into is basically on a policy level. What are we seeing with regards to this particular ecosystem? Or is वक्त क्या चल रहा है? What is like the background? What are the current affairs within this particular ecosystem?
Thank you, Javairyah, for such a kind introduction. And I would like to break your question. I think you asked two questions. One is the policy side, the other is more on the definition side of what startup ecosystem is. I think I'll just first zoom in on the startup ecosystem. So essentially, startup ecosystem के अंदर चार पांच बड़े important चीज़ें आ जाती हैं. Number one is the talent in itself.
Okay.
And I think Pakistan has enormous amount of it. There has been a lot of awareness about it, and we have seen a transition in past 5 to 7 years in terms of fresh graduates opting for starting their own business.
Exactly.
अब एक तो बहुत अच्छी डिबेट आ जाती है, what is a startup?
हाँ जी.
So startup normally in the world is defined as a sort of is a type of business which would grow exponentially in revenues, but the size of the business would not grow as much.
Okay.
So the amount of wealth creation far exceeds than that of the number of jobs that may be created in that company. So
Okay.
it can be a normally जो हम US के या Western startups देखते हैं तो वो grow करते हैं 100 लोगों की और उसकी valuation $2 billion होती है.
Interesting.
Right? And this is considerably different from legacy businesses. So for instance, if you are in a trading business, आप लोग ज़्यादा करते जाते हैं या आप मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में मशीनरी लगाएंगे, जितनी बड़ी मशीनरी होगी उतना ज़्यादा लेबर होगा और वो एक सेट नंबर ऑफ प्रोडक्ट जो है वो इनिशिएट करेगा. बट स्टार्टअप्स इज quite different. There the revenue goes hyperbolic.
Okay.
तो जो है ये थोड़ा सा एक की डिफरेंस है. हाँ बिल्कुल स्टार्टअप्स कंसल्टिंग बिजनेसेस भी हो सकते हैं, बड़े सारे और बिजनेसेस. सो वन कुड बी स्टार्टिंग अ बिजनेस विच मे बी कॉल्ड स्टार्टअप. द अदर वन इज द टेक्नोलॉजी स्टार्टअप दैट इज डिसरप्टिंग एग्जिस्टिंग लेगेसी बिजनेसेस
ठीक है.
बाय शेयर competitiveness in terms of their cost. So एक तो ये मैं क्लियर करना चाह रहा था. दूसरा जो startups का talent का we have around 262 universities. A lot of universities have adopted these incubators, accelerators, and then that talent, the top tier talent is now moving towards setting up their own shops. So number one is the number of startups that are coming on. And the talent that is coming into these startups. The second very important part of the ecosystem is the capital. And the third is infrastructure. So I'll first touch upon infrastructure. Infrastructure basically is whether if I decide today that I want to set up a startup,
Okay.
where do I go? Do I have the facilities from the government or the private sector where I can sit, brainstorm, and create my idea or ideate and create my business in a cost-effective manner, and do I get any sort of facilities from the state or from the private sector? And I think that has really boomed in past 5-6 years, where Ministry of IT, especially Ignite, set up various NICs, university, HEC also mandated OREC and other incubating arms of these universities to set up to facilitate students. And then we have also private co-working spaces, which are now plug and play for 1, 2 member, 5 member startups, which are very cost effective. So the second is infrastructure, which has sort of boomed, I would say, for startup. The third very important part is the capital. And I think Pakistan has been isolated on that front. If we were talking in 2015, 2016. But a lot of awareness took place. Overseas Pakistanis played a big part. A lot of overseas Pakistanis came back, invested here as angel investors, also brought in venture capitalists. Although since our ecosystem has not been that mature for venture capital, so they haven't housed here in Pakistan. Most of them are housed in Middle East and invest in Pakistan through special purpose vehicles. But I think that capital has unlocked because we sort of saw, if we cumulate past 4 years capital, that amounts to around $1 billion in investments
That's
in the
interesting.
startup space. So I think these three aspects are very important. The fourth one is, of course, government regulations and regulatory systems. But then again, those startups, that really depends on which area do they work in. So if it's a fintech startup, it might be difficult because you have State Bank of Pakistan as a regulator, and money has always been a sensitive topic, right? And fintech, to be very honest, has not been very welcoming from the central banks or governments in the start, but now has been a lot of adoption there. But that really depends on which sector are they disrupting or which sector they are working in. However, the regulatory load is pretty high in Pakistan, and this is where STZ also comes in. We'll talk about it later. And the fifth part is, I think, overall cost of doing business, which in terms of startups doesn't affect them that much because there is not machinery involved. If we're talking about manufacturing or high-tech manufacturing startups, cost of utilities and cost of land and things like this might be relevant, but most of the startups here in Pakistan are services startups. So I wouldn't say it has a lot to do, but yes, the other part is the mentors network, which has really boomed in past 5-6 years. A lot of mentorship is available in various incubators, accelerators, venture capital, and there are a lot of startup events now. Pasha is taking a lot of lead in this. Pasha is Pakistan Software House Association. They have been taking a lot of lead in terms of holding these awards and all, and providing recognition to great startup. So I think the ecosystem is maturing. It hasn't matured. We haven't been able to produce billion-dollar companies, but yes, we have had a few $100 million valuations recently. And but Pakistan is a difficult market. However, it is one of the most attractive markets because of the sheer size of the market and population. So there is huge potential, but I think we'll reach there in a few years.
2-3 questions come to my mind, but since we shared a positive note on the funding element, so there was like this recent report by Profit, not a report, but an article that I read recently that discussed the last quarter of 2023 was rather positive for the seed fundings coming in. Almost 5 startups they announced a raise of $15.6 million US, and one of them was EduFi and a few others. But still, when you talk to people like Kulsum Lakhani and others in the space, they do share the sort of problems that Pakistani startup or the startup culture faces. You say the word Pakistan, conversations start to shut down. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, Pakistan being an attractive market because of its sheer size. We hear a lot of rhetoric and perhaps also some truth to it about the IT industry and its potential to boom. But in real terms currently, how do you see this sort of not culminating too soon. There is also the issue of brain drain. There's also the issue of still the nexus between academia and practical work that seems to be quite broken. We do release policies on AI, on data protection, etc., but it's not doing what it's supposed to do. What do you have to say about that?
So I think you've raised several very important points. Number one is I'll also sort of talk about the recent drop in funding in
Okay.
2023, and this is a global phenomenon. This is not something which is a lot to do with Pakistan, and actually Pakistan, while so let me sort of first explain why the VC money has suddenly dried up. But that's not just the case in Pakistan, it's all
Yeah,
across
it
the
was a
globe.
global trend, yeah.
And it's because of the rise in interest rates from 2010, post 2008, 2009 crisis. In 2010, interest rates were practically zero there, right? 0.25%, 0.5%. In Pakistan, we enjoy a 22% policy rate. So at 0.25%, literally money and loans were free. And a lot of these venture capitalists uh, brought in that money to the frontier markets and emerging markets. Pakistan have jumped from frontier to emerging, now back to frontier. But they could afford that risk profile. But as we speak, the interest rates have touched around 5%. And that debt has become extremely expensive. And that's why a lot of debt restructuring, debt profile restructuring is happening globally because money is not cheap anymore. However, money is still coming in. And like you said, 2023 last quarter was pretty good for Pakistan. But while the interest rates were raised there, the another very unfortunate aspect of Pakistan was that Pakistan PKR devalued significantly by almost 55%. And if you look at in past 3 years, it has devalued by 85%. Now, you as an investor would definitely want to look at a market where you invest money and the currency would devalue. So it has direct impact on your dollar rate returns. And I think that has been unfortunate that both the interest hike cycle and our macroeconomic issues or macroeconomic deterioration happened at the same time. So it has a double effect. But I think as the markets have now stabilized, you see a pickup in the investments again. And these investments came in the moment we had current account stabilized, we had our reserves stabilized. So I think the global markets also look at number one, security, number
Okay.
two, political stability. And I think once the elections are done, things are going to improve further. And this is my
Hopefully.
this is my take.
Okay.
And I mean, I always think as if I were an investor, what would I look at, right?
Okay.
I would definitely look at these 3 points: security, political, and macroeconomic stability. And this is a prerequisite for any market. Number two point is actually the brain drain. And I think that is very concerning. And whole idea of our organization, which is Special Technology Zones Authority, and which sets up these large special technology zones, is actually to provide a destination for these brains to work in Pakistan, right?
Okay.
And bring in top global companies here. So they set up a shop here, and we don't lose this top talent to Middle East or the Western markets. And I think maybe in the short term we don't feel the effect or the consequences of such a brain drain, but in the long run I think this is a big problem. And we see countries like in the West and even countries in the East, China, Taiwan, South Korea, doing phenomenal efforts to bring back their white collar workforce from the
Exactly.
West to the East. And I think Pakistan, with STZA and with several other policies now taking shape, I think one of the things that you need to sort of because I also represent government here. When government moves, there are a lot of stakeholders, right? So there's a lot of inertia, and private sector is way more agile than
Exactly.
that of the government. So I completely understand criticism from the private sector. I've been on that side as well, criticizing the government. But when the government moves, it has a lot of inertia because of the stakeholders that it has. And then one of the other problems, especially in the technology sector, and I think this is one of the unique perspective that I'll give you, is that our form of governance
Okay.
is based on rule of business 1973,
Oh, dear
right?
Lord.
And our constitution is also uh, was formed in the year of 1973, under which this rule of business 1973 takes and it defines how the government would conduct, right? Now, if you start mapping the technology sector, and by technology sector I don't mean IT.
Okay.
By technology sector, I mean the whole tech, agri-tech, fintech, right? If you look at fintech, it's not IT, it has a lot to do with banking,
Yes.
right? So, health tech, uh, robotics, and then robotics are in across different sectors, right? So if you look at the whole tech and you map it on rule of business, you'll see most of the half of the policies would be with Ministry of Industries, others would be with Ministry of Science and Technology, others would be with Ministry of IT, some would be in the agriculture
So we're too
department.
scattered.
So because we didn't even have a phone or a computer back in 1973, right? And now we're sitting 40 years down the lane, and we're talking about why we are not being able to why we are not being able to sort of enable that growth for the technology sector, is because the stakeholders are so divided within our rules of business,
Okay.
that it becomes extremely confusing even for the government sometimes, because it sometimes a policy that may be shaped by one department can go in a turf of other department, and then they need to be consulted in a way that that policy is owned by the government, right? So the private sector has to bear the brunt of that inertia,
So
and I
it's
completely understand,
an
but
institutional crisis at the same level.
yes, yes. And I think a lot of effort is being undertaken to streamline that. We have seen that in recent times, and with Special Technology Zones Authority also, we serve as more of a collaborator with the government to invite them to the zones and enable the private sector to have special rules and regulations within those zones, so that they have that ease of doing business. And I think I didn't mention the startup ecosystem. Ease of doing business is another very important aspect
Yeah.
for private sector and startups, and I think that has been one of the major challenges. And like you said, what Kulsum mentioned as well. Uh, I think brain drain with ease of doing business, with confusion in the governance system, these are some of the major bottlenecks that we need to solve. And I think STZ is working on all three.
Then allow me to come to the latter half of, I was actually going to ask this later, but what exactly is STZ doing when we say in making the ease of business for investors or the startup culture to boom? What exactly are the tangible steps that are being taken apart from the networking and apart from all of that? And if you can sort of guide us on to what are the recent most policy implementations that came in place thanks to STZA with regards to regulatory.
Okay, so Jerry, I'll not follow the typical marketing pitch, but let me sort of break STZ's role in the national technology ecosystem into three parts. The first one is the policy side, and I think we're rather a very nascent organization. We became an act in 2021, a formal law, and one of the things that we did was include all the incentives within the law, so it could not be reversed. Pakistan is very notorious for policy reversals.
Yes.
So to sort of, and we within the law we also added a protection clause. That if any incentives are amended, it will
Okay.
be towards the benefit of the licensee,
Okay.
and not otherwise. So one is to ensure policy continuity. We included it in the law, and the law was unanimously passed, which means that it had that political ownership from all parties.
Okay.
And I think that was a big blessing for us. Number two, was that we were able to complete rules and all regulations. And I can name a few organizations, or probably typically it takes organizations, government organizations, around 5 to 6 years to develop rules and regulations. We have done it in our first 2 years, so that there's certainty of how the procedures or business operations would take place. The third is for the first time in that law, the technology sector was taken as a horizontal rather than a vertical.
Okay.
So as a horizontal, we work with almost all provincial and federal ministries, and we invite them all and the relevant private sector to come in and operate in these special technology zones and enjoy special laws. Once you So this is the overall design of the law. And the fourth design parameter was the triple helix model of innovation, which was basically government, academia, and industry coming together. And if we look at the technology ecosystem of the West or the East, and we see these unicorns coming out of across the globe, you see triple helix at play, where government and academia is more towards supply side. So the academia supplies your talent. Your government looks at ease of doing business, policy, special policy,
The flexible environment.
and flexible environment. And the industry is basically the demand side, absorbing talent, and then also influencing curriculum, because normally what we study in university and when we graduate, the market is 5 years ahead,
Exactly.
right? So trying to sort of bridge that gap, and that triple helix is prioritized within our design point, and any special technology zone to be made shall follow the triple helix model. So one is the law side. The second is in just 2 years we have been able to operationalize 6 technology zones. So we have 6 operational technology zones across Pakistan. And I think that is a big achievement on our part, given the inertia that is there.
Exactly.
And we have 5 under construction. So total,
Oh, that's wonderful.
yes, we have total of 11 technology zones, but you need to understand one important part. Pakistan struggles with patience, right? And what we want is now, or rather yesterday. But STZA, or special technology zones, is a midterm project, right? And it takes around 4 5 years or 6 years for buildings and facilities to be set up. So while a lot of technology zones are under construction, we've also on short-term basis we have
Already set
seen
up.
suitable infrastructure, and which is close to the tech ecosystem, or close to universities, close to talent, and already the clusters, scattered clusters of technology companies exist, because we look at the knowledge ecosystem, whether that may be viable within that tech zone, and wherever that viability have been proven by private sector or public sector, then we have a process and we award licenses. There are 2 licenses that we award. Number one is the zone developer. The zone developer are the builders of technology zones, and the zone enterprise is the technology company. It could be a startup, SME, large company, venture capital. And then we have the best incentives in the region, and that this is something that we have tracked. So we provide 10 years income tax holiday, 10
that's
years,
interesting.
10 years customs-free imports for licensees, then foreign currency account, so you can keep all your exports in dollars with our license. And State Bank has been very kind to us on that front. And then for venture capital, we have 10 years tax holiday on capital gain. One of the reasons why venture capital was not setting up shop here.
Okay.
So we have removed the taxation. And then for ease of doing business, just next month in January, we'll be launching our one window. It took us 1 year to develop, but we have so what we have done, one important thing, this is the phase 1 of our single window, which will be completed and launched next month, is that you don't need to know anybody in STZA. You don't need to know our office. You just need to visit our website, apply digitally,
Okay.
upload your application digitally, and you can track each step of your application. Any queries, any presentations required would be communicated through our one window. You'll be awarded a license digitally, and all your incentives will be operationalized digitally. So you don't need to, in this whole process, you don't need to visit or talk to anyone in STZA.
So it will be acknowledged by the government and other stakeholders
Yes.
involved.
So for us to operate, the one window has been made part of our law.
Okay.
And then for each incentive, we have amended relevant acts of FPR, Sales Tax Act, Income Tax. And in the second phase of one window, we'll move towards provinces. और जो है provinces के अंदर भी we have already sort of finalized provincial framework and consulted all the provinces on how these technology zones, because 18th amendment is very complex. तो जब आप ऑपरेशनल लेवल पे उस पे जाते हैं, इट्स अ ग्रेट अमेंडमेंट, बट ऑपरेशनली इट बिकम्स अ बिट चैलेंजिंग, बिकॉज आधी चीज़ें जो है वो प्रोविंसेस की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी होती है, आपकी आधी आपकी होती हैं, तो वो अकाउंटेबिलिटी सारा सेटअप करना कि किस तरह ये, क्योंकि प्राइवेट सेक्टर को तो 18th अमेंडमेंट से कोई गर्ज नहीं है, उसके लिए ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस है. So we're really sort of, working along with all the provinces and all the federal agencies to ensure that ease of doing business that we're promising externally to the private sector.
Asha, that was an interesting, sort of basically information on what your organization does. But थोड़ा सा अगर हम individual level पे या society level पे जाएं तो there's a certain perception about the startup culture. It just feels like the world where you enter and you have पैसा running to you, right? एक ये perception है. और बीच में, you talked about the nexus academia और मतलब, the supply of talent. Then I sort of want to understand कि इस वक्त पाकिस्तान में how do you see the supply of talent coming in? What is the vision, motivation behind it? Because जो कुछ मेरी understanding है या people that I've met or things that I've heard is you either see people entering into the food industry, we're always on the consumption basis wali cheese, right? So you never seem to be moving towards really the innovative part about the startup structures, although बहुत से ऐसे हैं. And also, it's always like a pleasure to know a lot of them are also led by women. So there's like an added thing. But really, what is the motivation behind the people who you may interact with when it comes to building up a startup, starting a business, etc. And iske saath saath hi, I would like to ask then, Pakistan mein is waqt, what is the biggest reason for failure as well? And now I understand the structural part humne sara discuss kar liya, but from an individual's perspective, from a society's perspective, how does it play out, and what do you feel that the person who wants to become a party to this needs to be doing, and that's they're not doing it?
अच्छा जी, सबसे पहले तो आई थिंक कि देखें, जो आप यू टच्ड अपॉन अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट वेयर पीपल सॉर्ट ऑफ फील कि हम स्टार्टअप बनाएंगे एंड द मनी विल स्टार्ट कमिंग इन.
Exactly.
आई थिंक ये तो देखिए, इसके प्लस पॉइंट भी है और नेगेटिव पॉइंट भी है, राइट? सो टू क्रिएट अवेयरनेस, इट्स अ मार्केटिंग गिमिक, राइट? You create great pitches to attract people, and we definitely want people to come towards startups because we don't want engineers and doctors coming in. जिस तरह हमारी जनरेशन में मोस्टली हमारे पेरेंट्स ने हमें कहा कि डॉक्टर बनो या इंजीनियर बनो, राइट? एंड आई टू फाइट माई वे आउट ऑफ इट.
एक और चीज़ इसी बात से, अभी आपको ऐसे नहीं लग रहा कि जस्ट बिकॉज दिस ट्रेंड ऑफ स्टार्टअप स्टार्टेड तो सब स्टार्टअप में जाओ? वी एंड अप टेकिंग द सेम सॉर्ट ऑफ
ऐसे ही है, एंड आई थिंक इट हैज़ अ लॉट टू डू विद आवर कल्चरल सॉर्ट ऑफ एस्पेक्ट एज वेल, कि वो क्रेज आ जाता है और जो है ना सेल आ जाती है, सारे उधर पहुंच जाते हैं, स्टार्टअप का वो आ जाता है. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think you learn a lot from your failures. Personally, मैंने देखा है success has made me overconfident, and failures have taught me a few good lessons that I don't
So we
forget.
entered the philosophical realm
हाँ,
then.
तो मेरे ख्याल में if somebody wants to देखें, वैसे भी globally 98% failure rate है, right? 2% is able to make, but वो 98% फिर jobs के अंदर आ ही जाते हैं. मतलब ये नहीं है कि वो, because startup के अंदर जब आप उस grill से गुजरते हैं, right? And I personally ran a business for 3-4 years. I had to close down because of COVID. But one of the biggest learnings that sort of, or biggest change in my personality or mindset was because I ran my own business, right? And that's where you understand you have to deal with taxation, accounts, marketing, HR, right? So it gives you a very holistic sort of perspective on how these organizations operate. So even if you run a 2-member team or 3-member startup, right? And even if it fails 2 years down the lane, you know what SSCP does, you know what FPR is, आप टैक्सेशन सीख लेते, सो लर्निंग फिर भी बहुत ज़्यादा होती है. सो आई हैव नेवर ओपोज्ड फेलियर्स, एंड भाई आप मेरा वो पर्सनली जवेरिया, मैं थोड़ा सा ना इस मामले में ऑप्टिमिस्टिक भी हूँ, राइट? एंड आई एम अ वेरी रिलेंटलेस ऑप्टिमिस्ट. एंड मैं उसको इस तरह सोचता हूँ कि 100 बच्चा गया, 98 फेल भी हो गया, 2 भी सक्सेसफुल हो गए,
Exactly.
ठीक है? दिस इज गुड, मतलब वो जो फेल हुए हैं वो वापस जॉब्स के अंदर वो हो जाएंगे। उनकी जिंदगी में 2 साल या आपके करियर में 2 साल इतने इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं होते।
ओके।
एजुकेशन में बड़े इंपॉर्टेंट होते हैं, सही है कि आप एफएससी फेल ना करें ताकि आप उसी साल आप यूनिवर्सिटी में 3-4 साल में ग्रेजुएट हो जाए। सो 2-3 साल अगर आपके ज़ाया हो भी जाए, सो आई डोंट थिंक इट्स अ बैड थिंग। इट देयर इज enormous amount of learnings that you do in a job। अगर आप डायरेक्टली जॉब में आते हैं, आप बहुत ज़्यादा रिस्क अवर्स हो जाते हैं, सही है। योर लर्निंग इज कैप्ड, योर ग्रोथ इज कैप्ड, राइट। सो इवन इफ आई एम इन द गवर्नमेंट, आई नो दैट I'll grow by 10% annually, and oh yeah, I'll have
चल
great
तो रहा
exposure
है।
and all, but you become really lazy, right? Because you're given a job, you do that job. Entrepreneurship is a very different ball game. Innovation is more hardcore. Entrepreneurship भी मतलब is a, and I think कि जितने भी ये पैसों के पीछे अट्रैक्ट करके जाते हैं, या at least I respect them more because at least they have an ambition and they're willing to try,
Okay.
right? Even if they fail, even they go through a depressing phase, that makes them either a guy or a girl, right? It changes them as a person, the experience in itself, right? And I'm dead sure that they are a better person at the end of the day because they वो ग्रिल से गुजर चुके होते हैं। सो एक तो मैं ऐसे उसमें, और हाँ ये देखें डबल एज स्वॉर्ड होता है जहाँ पे आप बहुत ज़्यादा स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम या अवेयरनेस मार्केट करते हैं, फिर मार्केटिंग में इस तरह हो जाता है, ठीक
हो
है, तो
जाता
वो
है
हो जाता है।
थोड़ा सा
और
बंदा।
और उसके अंदर ये भी नहीं है, हम ग्लोबली भी मार्केट कर रहे होते हैं,
हाँ
राइट।
हाँ
सो
बिल्कुल।
ग्लोबली भी आ, आ, अगर कोई वेंचर कैपिटलिस्ट आता है वो देखता है यार सिर्फ 10 स्टार्टअप्स है, और दूसरे देखते हैं वो 1000 स्टार्टअप्स हैं, राइट। सो डेफिनेटली दे वुड appreciate the market of 1,000 startups, right? That comes to the second point now, which is the capacity to run a startup, right? And I think that's where a lot of efforts needs to be undertaken at even university teaching level, right? We need to look at our curriculums. We can look at how teachers are teaching them about the markets, right? और
एग्जैक्टली।
ये एक बड़ा मेजर शॉक होता है जब आप यूनिवर्सिटी से मार्केट में आते हैं।
बिल्कुल।
तो जो है ठीक है, पाकिस्तान में अगर आप अच्छी अंग्रेजी लिख सकते हैं तो जॉब शॉप मिल जाती है, बट दैट इज़ नॉट अ रियल स्किल, राइट।
एग्जैक्टली।
सो वो उसमें टाइम मेरे ख्याल में लगेगा। एंड दिस इज कनेक्टेड टू योर थर्ड पॉइंट के जो इंडस्ट्री एकेडेमिया लिंकेज है, राइट। वो कुछ यूनिवर्सिटीज हैव बीन इम्प्रूविंग। मैं आई स्टडी फ्रॉम लम्स में मार्केट or studies are very close, right?
राइट।
NUST have made big progress. GK has been very market oriented university, right? So there are good universities जो कि पहले से connected थी, कुछ हैं जो अब आए जा रही हैं। HEC played a big role in sort of introducing OREC and also telling universities to sort of interact with market and all. But I think a lot of efforts that need to be undertaken. STZA in this specific part has really focused on notifying technology zones within universities.
ओके।
So हमने यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ फैसलाबाद में एग्रीटेक जोन करवाया, राइट। एंड नाउ द कंपनीज कैन गो टू यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर, set up their shop within the university, hire within the university, and enjoy all the tax benefits.
So that itself is an ecosystem
Yes,
running there.
running there. Pakistan Austria Fachhochschule in KP,
Okay.
वहाँ पे चूंकि वो अप्लाइड साइंसेज वाली है, ठीक है, एंड ऑलरेडी सम रियली ग्रेट कंपनीज आर वर्किंग देयर, हायरिंग फ्रॉम द यूनिवर्सिटी, राइट,
Okay.
एंड इंटरैक्टिंग एंड अवार्डिंग प्रोजेक्ट्स टू यूनिवर्सिटी प्रोफेसर्स, रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट्स। तो आपके जो फाइनल ईयर प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं वो अब उस कंपनी के इंडस्ट्री नीड्स हैं,
सही।
राइट। एंड दिस इज समथिंग दैट वी हैव सीन। सिलिकॉन वैली क्या है? सिलिकॉन वैली स्टैनफोर्ड से
Yeah, Stanford,
बना,
MIT,
राइट,
all of that.
ठीक है। फिर आपको सो देर आर 3 evolution of tech zones. Number 1 is the US is the leader. स्टैनफोर्ड से बना, फिर जो है ना रिसर्च ट्रायंगल से बने, फिर आपका यहाँ पे चाइना ने 80s में गवर्नमेंट ने इंटरवीन कर दिया, साउथ कोरिया में भी गवर्नमेंट ने इंटरवीन कर दिया, लार्ज पार्सल्स ऑफ लैंड वर अवॉर्डेड टू यूनिवर्सिटीज एंड industry, and they set up shops. In 2000s, in South Korea and China, now the companies, the private sector, are building zones, right? So we have LG Park, we have Samsung Park, right? And these are huge campuses in in China we have Huawei Park, right, in Hangzhou. तो ये आपके जो टेक जोन है वो प्राइवेट सेक्टर लेड. हमने यहाँ पाकिस्तान में तीनों अलाउ किए. गवर्नमेंट ओरिएंटेड जो
ठीक
इसको
है.
गवर्नमेंट इनिशिएट कर रहे हैं, यूनिवर्सिटीज़ के लिए भी, एंड फॉर द प्राइवेट सेक्टर एज वेल, बिकॉज वी आर कैचिंग अप, वी आर 2 decades लेट. सो ये जो इसके अंदर एफर्ट्स, जारी बात है हम पॉलिसी दे सकते हैं, देन द मार्केट्स play on their own, market players play on their own, but definitely there has been that realization.
Okay.
However, I think it will take some time, because हमारा प्राइवेट सेक्टर भी उतना मेच्योर नहीं है जितना आपको इंटरनेशनली मिलता है. बिकॉज यहाँ पे कॉर्पोरेट प्राइवेट सेक्टर IT is great, but IT भी need is a maturing वो, क्योंकि our IT boom has been very recent. It's not
Exactly.
5 decades old or 4 decades old. We don't have big unicorns. There are really great companies who are moving towards that status. But I think, and Pasha is doing great work, doing a lot of research and all, and working with HEC, STZA, and other organizations. With us, they have been really active to advocate for IT sector.
Okay.
And so they are very active organization. But I think बाकी भी जो है गवर्नमेंट में भी ये रियलाइजेशन है, और ऑलमोस्ट अब तो खासकर जो हमारे ग्रेड 22, ग्रेड 21 जो सीनियर गवर्नमेंट लीडर्स हैं और जो मिनिस्टर, सबके बच्चे जो हैं वो IT या कंप्यूटर साइंस में है. सो देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ, देयर इज अ सोशल एस्पेक्ट टू इट.
Exactly.
That within their houses and homes they see, or COVID was a big realization because everybody had to sit on Zoom, right?
Exactly. It was all digitized
तो
anyway.
वो रियलाइजेशंस और वो है. बट आई थिंक जिस तरह मैंने आपको कहा, गवर्नमेंट में थोड़ा सा इनर्शिया होता है. हाउएवर, एक बात मैं जरूर कहना चाहूंगा कि पाकिस्तान में ना, जब कोई चीज नहीं होती तो सारी चीज गवर्नमेंट पे डाल देते हैं. ये भी नहीं होता. मार्केट प्लेयर्स हैव बिग स्पेस. यूनिवर्सिटीज आर देयर,
Yeah.
मार्केट आर देयर. लेबर जो ब्रेन ड्रेन है,
Okay.
I think private sector should also, take some initiatives in terms of reversing it. Government has very limited resources. It can introduce policies, and policies IB and policy implementation में भी time लगता है stakeholders का. But I'm highly against blaming the government on everything. And in
Okay.
Pakistan we have been a punching bag, कि जब कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा होता तो punching bag.
ये तो
But
हुकूमत
जब आप policy के abuse को देखते हैं या market के डायनामिक्स और या उसके अंदर एनोमलीज देखते हैं, तो हमें प्राइवेट सेक्टर एक्टर्स मिलते हैं. एंड देयर आर नो विसल ब्लोइंग फ्रॉम द प्राइवेट सेक्टर ऑन दोस फ्रंट्स.
I have so many questions, but I will boil it down to two now because we're also short in time. But again, those two questions would require your expertise again. Ek to shuru, maybe before we started, we were talking about the centralized and decentralized sort of approaches when it comes to digital economy, in the sense that a lot of organizations or people would advocate for a structural way for people to earn through the digital infrastructures, and on the other end you have the freelancers. So startup system में भी कुछ ऐसे ही होता है कि there are some little organizations or upcoming startups who would like to work on a freelance model, but they have a structure. And on the other end there seems to be sort of discouraging remarks for the freelancers themselves. उनको भी मेरा ख्याल से इस चीज़ का डर है कि किसी दिन हमें भी एक बॉक्स में बंद ना कर दिया जाए with the taxation. You never know, any day there could be that coming in. Once you start to seeing an influx of income, perhaps that could change the way things are working. तो एक तो आपका छोटा सा your take on that, and the other larger concluding question for you would be, okay, with so many geopolitical risks happening across the world, Ukraine, Gaza, and then tensions between countries like China and India, और भी जो इस तरह की चीज़ें चल रही हैं, how do investors or current startups within Pakistan sort of work towards resilience with regards to the geopolitical risk element, और उसका कितना एक रोल है इस सारी ecosystem के ऊपर? That will be my last question to you. Last two questions to you.
The last one is very interesting and complex question. I'll try to, because I've been a passionate geopolitical reader. And but first I'll पहले सवाल का आपका मैं वो कर लेता हूँ. देखिए, centralized, decentralized, for us as policy body, our goal is to actually enable that trust which lacks between the government and these decentralized players. When we talk about IT sector, and IT sector के अंदर आपका ज़्यादातर पाशा PSEB में representation आ जाती है. तकरीबन मेरे ख्याल में I think we have 14,000 companies 14,000, 13,000, 14,000 companies. Around half of them are registered with PSEB. Pasha is a great database. And the whole so one of the argument that is made is the brand Pakistan, right? So अगर आपका फ्रीलांसर अपवर्क पे बैठा है और वो उसने पाकिस्तान लेबल किया हुआ है और वो एक क्लाइंट का काम अच्छी तरह से नहीं करता, right? So it's the brand Pakistan that is hurt, right? One is this. The second one is because they're off the radar, right? So they consider them as the part of black market. So this is what IT
Exactly.
is talking about freelance, and I'll be very open about it because these are very legit concerns, right?
Exactly.
And since they're off the record, right? Because वो अपना फॉरेन अकाउंट बना देंगे, अपवर्क पे काम करेंगे, बाहर पेपैल पे आएंगे, पैसे यहाँ पे लाएंगे ही नहीं, सिर्फ तनख्वाह या अपने खर्चे डिलीवर करवाएंगे, right? So they consider them as a black sort of market, undocumented market. That's what black is, right? Undocumented, untaxed market, right? And while IT sort of pays taxes and all these other things at commercial rate, they're sitting in residence, not paying rents and all, and that sort of hurt the IT industry. The third is also the talent that could have come to the more formal sector is going towards freelance because they have way more facility than that of IT industry, right? And they can earn more by
experiment.
And experiment उसमें तो ये तीन मैंने major aspects आपको I can go on and on because we have interacted with both. So freelancers का देखिए freelancers का now coming to my own perspective as a policy guy, वो ये है कि first we need to enable trust, right? And enabling trust जो है with the freelancers, I think one of the great steps by even the current caretaker IT minister is to set up e-Rozgar centers across the country where freelancers can come in and enjoy subsidized and not tax them, just initiate a regime where you can sort of make them, facilitate them and वो ग्रोस कर सके जो 500 कमा रहे हैं वो $1,000 कमा सकें, उनको ट्रेनिंग्स दें, ऑनलाइन ट्रेनिंग्स दें, फिजिकल ट्रेनिंग्स दें ताकि वो एंड देन ऑल्सो ट्रेन देम ऑन कन्वर्टिंग देम फ्रॉम फ्रीलांस टू एन IT कंपनी. ओके, बिकॉज आप फ्रीलांस में ग्रोथ कैप हो जाती है, $5,000 $10,000 महीने का कमा लेंगे, 20,000 कमा लेंगे, ठीक है, राइट? 20 से आप ऊपर नहीं जा सकते. जबकि आपको बड़ी सारी IT कंपनीज जो कि आज से 5 साल पहले $10,000 सालाना महीने का कमा रही थी, that have gone to $100,000, right? And they have created jobs and for us as a state organ, we have way more priorities that these freelancers become startups, SMEs and large companies, okay, right? So वो journey जो है उसको हम enable करना चाहते हैं rather than कि मैं फ्रीलांसर को पकड़ूं और उसे कहूं FPR के पास जाओ, इसके पास जाओ.
तो उस जर्नी को एडवोकेट भी मेरा ख्याल से करना फिर बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी हो जाएगा ऑन द पार्ट ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट. देन that is happening.
जिस तरह e-Rozgar का भी आया है, and I'm really glad that the government is not taking a very tough stance on freelancers because at the end of the day देखें वो आपसे कुछ मांग नहीं रहे हैं, वो बैठे हुए हैं और वो बाहर काम कर रहे हैं, आपका पेमेंट गेटवे है नहीं, राइट? सो बैंकिंग चैनल्स पे वो पता नहीं किस तरह पेपैल खुलवाता है मामू, किसी मामू को कह के या उसको, दिस इज द स्लैंग फॉर फ्रीलांसर के अमेरिका में मामू ढूंढा, उसके उस पे अकाउंट खोला, वहीं पे सारा जो है पेमेंट आई, वहां से वो रिपैट्रिएट करते हैं. एट द एंड ऑफ द डे दे से $500 million इज कमिंग थ्रू फ्रीलांसर एंड वी रियली डोंट नो कि बाहर कितना पार्क हो रहा है, राइट? But the state sort of needs to now facilitate in terms of कि ये जितने freelancers हैं and these are extremely decentralized. आपको मतलब हंगू में, चिचावतनी में कहाँ नहीं मिलेंगे, and a lot of these segments of freelancers are in the rural spaces, right? Urban तो है ही है, आपको rural में भी बहुत ज़्यादा मिलेंगे, सही है? तो आप उनको enable करें and most of our job should be, and I think IT ministry has taken this stance. Probably I don't know कि industry की कितनी support है, but I think that is a very brave step from the Ministry of IT कि e-Rozgar centers खोलें, because they come, because magic in knowledge ecosystem happens when exchange happens, interactions happen, right? क्योंकि मैन्युफैक्चरिंग तो है ही नहीं कि हमने फैक्ट्री में काम
हाँ,
करके
आइसोलेशन में तो नहीं हो सकता।
मैंने और आपने बात करनी है, ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग होनी है, आइडिया होना है, कल को मैं टीम अप करके. सो आई थिंक द current government stance is really great in
Okay.
terms of providing platforms for freelancers to come in, subsidized इनको जो है स्पेसेस मिले, सब्सिडाइज स्पेसेस मिलके वो वहाँ पे काम करे. जब 50 फ्रीलांसर साथ काम करेगा तो 10 कंपनियां भी निकल आएंगी. ठीक है, $1 वो वैसे ही ला रहा है,
ठीक है.
और उस डॉलर को वाइट चैनल्स के थ्रू किस तरह ला रहे हैं. आई थिंक दैट्स अ प्रॉब्लम दैट वी कैन क्रैक once we instill that trust within the freelancer. Because अगर ये वो इस उससे डरता रहा, और आपने बड़ा अच्छा कहा, मैं उस ज़्यादा ब्लंटली कह देता हूँ कि मैं जब भी फ्रीलांस से इंटरेक्ट किया, उन्हें कहें कि जी वो कंपनी बना दो, तुम आगे जाओ, कह रहे यार वो फिर FBR से.
Exactly.
ठीक है.
The dealings basically.
हाँ, so one of the things that within our STZ we have sort of addressed that
Okay.
कि FBR जो है वो वन विंडो के पीछे हो, and if there is problem we'll hand hold, but there's only one interface.
Okay.
But we cannot make the whole country as a special technology zone. These are
Zahir.
small islands of excellence that we want to build. Freelancers can populate, but they would need to set up a company. For a freelance technology zone, मतलब वो एक कॉन्सेप्ट है जो तो अभी हम कॉन्टेम्पलेट कर रहे हैं, बट इट्स अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट पॉलिसी. बिकॉज आपको पता है जवेरिया, जब आप एक पॉलिसी बनाते हैं ना, तो उस पॉलिसी की जो इम्पैक्ट है वो 25-25 साल पे आपने देखना होता है.
Okay.
Right?
हाँ, obviously long-term evaluation.
Or I think Pakistan more than ever have enough failures to realize that each policy needs to be debated and brainstormed in a way जो कि 2 decades or 3 decades पे, क्योंकि the sort of, because these are strategic intervention, and any strategic intervention going wrong can distort markets and even destroy markets. सो उसके अंदर फ्रीलांस के अंदर भी हम देख रहे हैं, बट वी डोंट वांट के फ्रीलांस को फैसिलिटेट करने के लिए इंडस्ट्री अफेक्ट हो. सो इट हैज टू बी अ वेरी, बिकॉज एट द एंड ऑफ द डे STZ's priority is the industry, right? And freelancer, of course, we value them, but it's the industry that drives the country sector, not the freelance. And I think freelance, although facilitated, the higher priority should always be the industry, because that's where the unicorns will come.
Okay.
और decentralized, I have no personal वो, but I think वो जो trust एक दफा आ जाए, and the government has to work hard to build that trust with its citizen and with freelancers, so that they are very comfortable in terms of bringing their dollars here on white channels, and declare them and not be afraid of being harassed.
Knowing this is a safe space, essentially.
बिल्कुल ऐसी है, बिल्कुल ऐसी है. And your last question, I think देखिए, मेरा पर्सनली पाकिस्तान के अंदर when we talk about स्टार्टअप स्पेस पे जियो पॉलिटिक्स का इतना अभी वो नहीं आया हुआ जितना इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे है.
Okay.
या जितना ओवरऑल, जिस तरह चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर was a very geopolitically hot topic, right?
Exactly.
But our startups haven't had that sort of financial muscle from China that it becomes an important stakeholder. Yes, we have seen Ant Financials coming in big. Daraz में आया, तामीर बैंक, ये टेलेनॉर का माइक्रो फाइनेंस बैंक में आया, बिग प्लेयर, बट वो भी टू अ वेरी लार्ज एक्सटेंट आइसोलेटेड है. उस तरह नहीं है कि आपको
वो
यहाँ
impact
पे
अभी नजर नहीं आ
हाँ,
रहा.
वो एंड फाइनेंस, एंड वो भी इस तरह के वो उन्होंने अपने आप को बाहर ही रखा है. मतलब मोस्टली मैनेजमेंट या वो वही यहाँ वाले ही रहे हैं. उस टाइप के मतलब एज कम्पेयर टू, अगर हम देखें इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, एंड दीज इन्वेस्टमेंट्स वर बैक इन 2015-16, राइट? उसके बाद यू सी अ लॉट ऑफ वेस्टर्न कैपिटल कमिंग इन टू दी स्टार्टअप्स. मार्केट में डेफिनेटली अगर आप पाकिस्तान को देखते हैं तो जियो पॉलिटिक्स आप जरूर कंसिडर करते हैं, राइट? एंड वन ऑफ द इम्पॉर्टेंट चैलेंज दैट वी हैव इज US वर्सेस चाइना. आई डोंट थिंक US इंडिया, ना चाइना इंडिया हैज एनी सॉर्ट ऑफ इट डायरेक्टली इम्पैक्ट अस, बट आई थिंक जो US चाइना का वो होता है उस पर थोड़ा सा इशू हमारा होता है. बट आई थिंक वहाँ पे पाकिस्तान इज ट्रेडिंग केयरफुली एंड वुड, and I think that is the advice ke take a country agnostic sort of an approach.
Exactly.
And I think we have been able to, Afghanistan needs to stabilize, I think. ईरान भी कभी अभी ये गाजा की वजह से दोबारा से थोड़ा ईरान का वो हॉट हो गया है.
Yes.
So I think this will remain a challenge. जाहिर बात है जब कंट्री टू कंट्री लेवल पे रिलेशंस डिटेरियोरेट करते हैं तो कैपिटल डिटेरियोरेट करता
Exactly.
है, बॉटलनेक्स क्रिएट होते हैं. सो आई थिंक पाकिस्तान is known for its resilience, and I think with every challenge we find some sort of a way out, and I think that will remain a trend uh, as long as कि ये region जो है वो overall geopolitically cool down ना हो जाए. Because अगर region geopolitically hot है then we have to make choices,
Exactly.
right? And those choices will have consequences, and with West, if those relationships deteriorate, of course the market players take that as a risk, right? और वो रिस्क जो है वो हमेशा रहेगा. बट उससे ज़्यादा मेरे ख्याल में जो हमारी सिक्योरिटी डोमेस्टिक इम्प्रूव हुई है और पास्ट 1 डेकेड, अगर आप देखें तो 2013-2014 के बाद सिक्योरिटी, आपकी डोमेस्टिक सिक्योरिटी बेहतर हुई है. तो उसकी वजह से भी कि कम से कम एक वक्त में तो ये मसला था ना जवेरिया, प्रॉब्ली यू वर टू यंग बैक देन, आई वाज आल्सो यंग बैक देन, बट मतलब आप पेशावर, इस्लामाबाद या लाहौर डरते होते थे, ठीक है,
दोबारा से वो सिलसिला शुरू हो गया.
क्राउडेड
प्रॉब्लम ये है.
क्राउडेड स्पेसेस में अभी भी है, बट अभी उस तरह नहीं है. उस वक्त बहुत डिफरेंट
हाँ, obviously.
लेवल था. Definitely what's happening right now is concerning, and that's why I mentioned stability of Afghanistan, because that's a major market player, and the US-China
Exactly.
trade war and technology war,
Exactly.
and we're talking about technology.
More specifically the technology.
हाँ, and then एक और ये है कि एक जो मेरा बड़ा concern है, and that's what really I want to work on, is also open up China's financial capital towards Pakistan in startup space, and also Chinese market, right? Because they've been going on a higher value chain, right? And their labor is becoming extremely expensive. So, and I know a few Pakistani companies who have set up a shop there and doing really well, right? But when we talk about China and Pakistan, people really have no idea the sheer size of it, and the market of it, and the amount of money that is there, right? So these are guys buying big banks and big automobile companies and buying the world.
Yeah.
Right? And in Pakistan, we have a window, but we don't really know how to open that window. So geopolitically, I would say if we should play it smart. I mean, China is willing to sort of finance our feasible, viable projects, right? And is willing to finance almost all of our infrastructure, right? And in startups and in technology, that is their priority. But we haven't been able to create that linkage as such. CPEC के अंदर 2 जॉइंट वर्किंग ग्रुप्स बने, IT पे बना है, साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी पे बना है. We actually got engaged into this, and we're introducing a few projects in coming months, inshallah. KG Tech के अंदर वो है, and that would be one of my key area. But our challenges geopolitical will remain there, and Pakistan businesses as always will remain resilient. Some will go bankrupt, maybe start a new business, maybe join job markets. However, new other businesses would be set up, because I think that's how we have over time survived, and that's how I think we're now also trained on. मतलब हमारा mindset जो है वो यही है कि फिर जुगाड़ लगा लो, right? And I think
that has not worked in policy, that has not worked anywhere so far, the जुगाड़ू mindset. And thank you so much for sharing such in-depth insights, and also the fact कि जो किताब पढ़ लेते हैं वो बाहर चले जाते हैं. इसका मतलब ये हरगिज़ नहीं कि आप किताब ना पढ़ें. इसका मतलब ये कि किताबें पढ़ें, and please bring that practical knowledge to the country where the value needs to be generated, and it will obviously impact people like myself, like yourself, and many others who would want that inspiration. इस वक्त inspiration की बहुत कमी है, and we hope that with this particular discourse on Pakistan's tech startup ecosystem, we're able to perhaps motivate while also discussing the critiques and the issues that prevail. Regardless of that, let's hope things for the better. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode. See you again on another episode of Access.